Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Today's special guest is experienced field archaeologist Dr. David E. Graves. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
Well, welcome people. This is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. Today I have a special guest, Daniel Galassini Jr. Is that how you pronounce the last name?
You got it right.
Great. Because Dr. Graves was talking about you weeks ago, and I said, we need him on our program. That seems like that would be a lot of fun. Dr. Graves, he's a frequent person on our program. And of course, if people don't know by now, he is a retired assistant professor from Liberty University. He received his degree, PhD, from Aberdeen University in Scotland. But our special guest, Daniel Galassini, he is the photographer at the el-Hammam excavation. Are you also at Shiloh or any other excavations?
Officially, I'm only at el-Hammam.
Okay, because I know that this morning, Dean Byers stated that they're also doing some excavations on Native American areas. I'll just say it like that because we can't be specific where it's at.
Since Dr. Byers spoke about that, then yes, I can say I'm on that project also. It exists.
Okay, say, caught you. So, and they got a nickname for el-Hammam. They call it T-Hep. Once again, right. el-Hammam is the excavation site in Jordan where these two gentlemen met. That's what I believe. And then at that location, Daniel has the title Director of Documentary Media. He also is a doctoral fellow in the College of Archaeology at Trinity Southwest University. That's the brief intro. Now, what I found else about you on the web. Dan has an extensive background doing special effects, sci-fi production, design, editing, and camera work. He has done effects for various TV and cable shows, has been on post-production engineer at Loyola Marymount University, and the theater engineer at the Dinah Theater at the New Mexican Museum of Natural History and Science. He regularly travels to the Middle East with archaeological teams, and his footage from Jordan and Israel has been seen on the Travel Channel, American Heroes Channel, Discovery, and others. Dan has been teaching and editing introduction to productions, set design, and constructions, and practical non-computer special effects courses, as well as traditional animations, independent studies for film and digital arts. So you got quite the experience. When I say a photographer, people, I'm not just saying that he's out there just snapping photos. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So we actually got an experienced photographer with experience in other areas such as media presentations. That's to let everybody know that what you're about. And so if you're ready, however you want to go about this, explaining what you do at the excavation, when you go in and photograph, maybe you want to talk about lighting, angles. It's your time, sir.
Okay. I feel like I need to qualify what you just said. Apparently that must have been from my CV for teaching at the University of New Mexico. The photography is actually not my main job in life. I fell into photography because of the el-Hammam project. You said my background, I actually started out high school having two really neat mentors. One was in traditional cell animation, and then the other, he used to work for Jim Henson on a couple of movies, and so he was very good at doing puppets and monsters and armor costumes and things like that. So that actually was what I wanted to do in life, was go into special effects and do puppets and monsters. And then ended up going to college. And in New Mexico, my first semester at college, there really wasn't a really great film program. So I was doing the sort of just university college thing. And anthropology was probably what I ended up going into if I had not managed to find another local school that actually had a program for doing film, and that ended up getting brushed aside. So I went into the filmmaking stuff. When I went to Los Angeles for grad school, I was there for 7 years, did end up working for the university, finally got really tired of LA. So I moved back to Albuquerque and was working in the film industry here, ended up working, like it says, for the Natural History Museum for their big large format theater. And around 2005, Dr. Collins ended up coming to the church I was attending, gave his lecture on the Tal el-Hammam project. I thought, wow, this is so amazing. I've got to try to make a documentary of this project. So since he was local in Albuquerque, I ended up going to lunch with him. He's the kind of guy who he enjoys people, and so I was immediately invited. Oh yeah, absolutely, come along on the whole project. So that was season 3. So I guess 2006-ish. And I just showed up with a whole bunch of camera gear because I was going to do a video documentary on it. And the official photographer for the project, his name is Mike Ludini. And in my heart, I will always consider him the project photographer because David knows Mike really, really well. He was also the photographer for Makadar project in Israel. And I think Mike was helping with Shiloh for a little bit, right, David?
Yeah, he was until he fell. He's getting up in age, and the rocks and stones were just a little bit too difficult for him to climb over, and so he sort of hung up the hat. And still does some editing and still is always involved with all the photos. But a lot of the photographs, stills were taken by Mike, and of course you worked with Mike since season 3. Season 3 was 2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Because season 1 was January 2006.
Okay.
Yeah. Time flies.
It does. Yeah.
But that's
Amazing.
where we met in 2008. And then you would come almost every season and work alongside of Mike, I think.
Yeah. So Mike really became my mentor in photography. I had taken a photography class back my freshman year at University of New Mexico when I did the anthropology also. So, I enjoyed that. And, back then the technology was completely different than what it is now. That was, film and developing smelly chemicals and a lot of expense. For me, it's kind of fun. It's almost like I have this weird turned around to this anthropology kind of aspect. And the whole premise behind the Tal el-Hammam project also lends itself really well to special effects and explosions and things like that. Yeah, since that time, I was kind of grafted into the core team. Since then, I started just kind of being in the fill-in photographer. So Mike was still the primary for many, many, many years. And then I started taking more photographs that were considered official photographs. And what makes a photograph official is when you put this kind of a thing into the photo. Because a meter stick, which these things, come apart. And if you have one of these, somehow that makes you professional, and this is now and if it's in the photo, it's official photograph that eventually is for publication.
We have some small black and white ones too that we use for the little stuff. Yeah,
there's a little north arrow that helps as well. So yeah, they come in all sizes. It's a bit of a coincidence, but that we're talking about photography. The last 2 days I've actually been teaching here at the VIU classroom, documentary media class for our archaeology students. So we've been photographing, pretending we're in a square, and we get out that meter stick and the north arrow, and have been doing some of those photographs. We got the little centimeter sticks because we got pottery that we've been photographing, and some objects and things.
For our listening audience, why the meter stick? Why the north?
So the photography that you do on the site, to me, it's interesting that photography and I would call the science of archaeology rather than the, the adventurers who just went around and grabbed stuff. It's interesting to me, the science of photography and the science of archaeology started at very similar time periods back in the 1800s. Photography became just an automatic part of archaeological exploration, because up until that time, some of the early explorers, without photography, you were at the mercy of how good the artist was that you were able to bring along. And in fact, I've been reading a book on Lieutenant Lynch, who was a United States naval officer who did a survey of the Jordan River Valley and the Dead Sea, where he actually took a couple of boats, ran the rapids down the Dead Sea or the Jordan River and mapped it. That was 1848, and so there was no photography. And knowing the locations where he's been and looking at the woodcuts of the artist, I'm thinking that doesn't look a thing like it. That is a terrible representation of the actual.
There was a lot of license that was taken in some of those images that we have in our books. I don't know if you know it, but part of the class that I taught at Oxford on the history of British biblical archaeology, we talked about Agatha Christie. And I don't know if you know, but Agatha Christie was the one that was doing all the photography from the excavation at with Sir Leonard Woolley. And she went back to England and took a course, and she set up at the dig house in a small closet where she did all of the developing of all the photographs. And so many of the pictures that we see of were done by Agatha Christie, and one of the first photographers on the site. So
I didn't know that. Now, did she use a pseudonym to do that, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. Most of her pictures are actually ascribed to her.
Okay.
But yeah, she was known for doing that with some of her novels and some of her writing.
Yeah.
But the photography was quite well done. And as she describes it, she had to change the way she was taking the photographs, and you could perhaps explain that a little bit better, and the 2D and the stills and the things that you take of the artifacts. But I just thought it was an interesting story talking about those early explorers and things.
Yeah. Well, getting back to the purpose, we know that archaeology is a destructive event. Every object, every wall, everything that is in the ground that we uncover existed at a period in time, and then we uncover it and take a photograph of it to preserve it for posterity and for research. And that's it. It never exists ever again, because now we have to move that out of the way so that we can get down below even more. So the documenting aspect of the archaeological photography is the main reason to be doing it.
Back to the north arrow, we put that in the square because we want to make sure we have it positioned in situ in its location. We want to know which way is north. I remember our surveyor, we used to ask Ataiba, where's the north? Because he got it actually off on some of his surveys. So
yeah.
I always joke about where's the north, because there's two types of north that people may not understand. There's true north, and then there's a magnetic north. You need to know which north you're talking about. And I think he started the survey in one, and then we had to switch to the other, and it led to some confusion for a few years there. But
yeah,
that north arrow is very important, and we use a compass a lot of times to orient that in the square.
So here is a photo that shows exactly the two items that I had just previously shown, the north arrow and that meter stick. There's a whole series of different kinds of photographs to take. So this would be specifically a locus photo.
And then the meter stick tells us how big the piece is, because you can see the black and white. And then, of course, the north, we know which way we orient that in the square. And that photograph will be numbered as a particular square that has a number designated by the surveyor. It gets a number as well. So every shot has to have a number assigned to it.
We're seeing here is a mud brick wall that we can still make out a lot of the actual bricks themselves. So you can see, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but you can see the bricks. We sort of describe the outline of them just a little bit more so that they're a little easier to see in this photograph. But you can see that, you know, this wall line carries this way. It would have come straight out towards us. And at this point, we decided we're not going to dig all the way down through them, so that we're able to also show that the orientation of these bricks, you know, we dig what you see here. This is what we call a balk, which is the side of the square. And we dig those in relationship to the grid we're on. And that grid is a north, south, east, western grid, which is why our bricks in this shot aren't necessarily going exactly, you know, with the way that we've cut the edges of this square.
Right.
So this photograph is representing that the orientation of this wall actually is diagonal towards our actual grid. So if the arrow is pointing north, what this tells us is that this wall is actually moving in sort of a northwest to southeasterly kind of direction.
Right.
And that's what's so helpful about putting the north arrow in there, is that represents, to people who understand why you do that, you know, people analyzing this photograph can get in their mind an idea of the orientation of where this building was. And this, in conjunction with the actual grid drawings that the square supervisors do, you know, all that kind of material works together to, you know, just help everybody have an understanding of what we're here. And, you know, the new technology now would be, okay, we take this information and we can now three-dimensionally model that building. This would be considered a locus photo for, if we ascribed a locus number to this. It's also potentially what we call a bulk photo, because it's actually oriented directly to see part of the bulk. You know, in this photo, we want the relationship of all the material that's above what is the remains of the wall. So if you notice what is missing from this photograph, it means that even though this is a really nice photograph of that square, it is not official, and we can't use it for official publication. You know, we can still publish this photo, but the problem is without the meter stick and the north arrow,
Doesn't mean anything.
it doesn't mean anything. Yeah, this is in fact what we just saw. So here's the mud brick in the bulk. Here's the mud brick along the bottom, and we look at this, and here's our mud brick in the bulk, and here's our mud brick that's going along the bottom. And this was taken probably a little bit later, because I noticed that there's something down here that may have been a rock that either fell in, or I don't know, we may have excavated down a little bit more, I'm not sure. If I had a meter stick and a north arrow in here, then this would officially become an entire square photo. We have a series of these photographs that we start out with when this is completely covered over by the ground surface layer. And so at the start of a dig season, if this is a brand new square, you can see the square line across here. So this pink line right here represents the square edge, the square edge here. So, you know, in this photograph, as we excavate downward, we will take photographs as we're going down, an overall view of the square. So this is probably the last photograph that I took as the season was coming to an end. And if this square was something that was done in a single season, I would have taken a photograph that would have been, you know, at this level. And I probably took one that was at this level. And then there's objects in here that certainly would have been tagged as a specific locus. You know, this strange rock that's kind of floating on top of this pillar. This pillar was left in here so that it would actually support that rock.
As you say, we do an opening photograph, and then every day you'd take a closing, usually a closing photograph, and then you would have, through the day, you might find something interesting and call the photographer over and say, I found a handle or a pot, and you'd have to photograph it with your meter stick, or the smaller ones that are like a ruler for the little tiny pieces. And then all of this gets put together because you're going down, you're destroying everything as you go down in that square. So you have to document it and make a historical record layer by layer, like a layer cake.
And David, I don't know how much you've talked about the importance of paperwork.
We haven't at all.
Okay. In archaeology, paperwork is paramount. It's extremely important. And so a warning to anybody who wants to get into archaeology and be a square supervisor, you're gonna have to love paperwork.
And I'm not talking about just one sheet. You've got probably about 10 or 15 sheets.
I'll show some ones that I know David knows these things very, very well.
Yep. Taboon. This is the one we found in the square in the Upper Tell, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, there's lots of taboons around, but if you say this is probably in my square, I think, I forget which season, but
this would have been that same season with the barrel.
Yeah, a taboon. Now, a taboon is the Arabic word for a cooking installation, and so they would put their fire in there and their bread, cook their bread, and so this quite important, but they're tricky to excavate because they're made out of compact clay, but it's a lot harder because of the heat.
Yep.
You get the square meter stick there, a different one we keep in I have one of those in my kit. They all come in different colors and sizes.
And so each colored section is 10 centimeters long. So we can assume that you put this kind of at this end of the taboon, so compensating for lens distortion, this thing may have been 35 centimeters. And that's the thing, today I was teaching the students in the class that one of the questions was, well, how many photographs do you take of something? And the answer used to be pretty much one, because back in the days of film, film was expensive. You didn't have, a whole lot of camera rolls with you. So you had to figure out what you thought was the best angle to represent and give all the information necessary for somebody to take that photograph and analyze whatever it is that you've taken the photograph of. Now with the digital cameras, you can take as many photos as you want, and it becomes more of a record keeping issue than an expense issue. Do I want a dozen photographs of exactly the same thing? At what point do they become redundant?
As a square supervisor, a lot of times I would see something in a photograph taken from a different angle that I'd missed. And so just by looking at my photographs, a lot of times I can piece together what was there and find something missing.
Yeah. And, I just said, well, in this photograph, if we extrapolate, I said 30 centimeters, but I would have been wrong if that's the only photograph that we have of this. I don't really know what the width of this thing is. So looking at this one, oops, it's probably much closer to actually being 40 centimeters across.
Yeah. And
so,
we would take physical measurements of it and have that on our paperwork. And so that can help us go back but that just gives you some perspective, because if you didn't have that meter stick there, you'd have no idea how big or small that object is in that photograph. And
then you definitely would have had to have gone to the paperwork to understand it. But this is very, 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 very helpful to represent it. And the other thing about this particular installation was, there's two ways to do three-dimensional capturing of objects. The new way is to use some sort of a 3D scanner. Mm-hmm. So, even the newest smartphones are able to do that kind of stuff. But an older technology, but it is still an absolutely useful technology. And so I'm going to actually be teaching both of these tomorrow. It's called photogrammetry. And that utilizes a program where you take photographs all the way around and as many angles of something to completely cover, getting photographs of the entire thing. and then you run it through a program that does basically exactly what the 3D scanners are trying to do almost in real time. And it will look at, it finds points of definition that it can assign to create point clouds and then create actual three-dimensional representations. And this, we actually did do that too. And I've got probably a series of maybe 60 photos. And I don't think, David, that I ever have actually run it through the computer. So
We did do the child burial.
okay.
I remember that we had done that and had run it through, and you can move it, see all the different perspectives and rotating it.
Okay.
Which is
Wow.
pretty cool.
Okay.
There's more reasons to be doing photography at a dig site. So we just kind of covered that, you're officially there to do official photographs that are scientific data for the overall research project. But then you want to just take site photos because, this is showing people doing stuff. And so, these photos find themselves in official publications, but they also find into, popular books on the excavation, websites. I mean, so, collecting these kind of photographs for fundraising purposes, and it's just fun to actually see, oh, this is actually what you do. And and it's also fun to look at these photos knowing that a lot of the tools that you see here are only going to be found in the Middle East.
Goofa.
Yeah,
Korea.
so I'm gonna let's see if I can how to zoom in real quick just a little more. Neat little things here are called goofas, and before the rubber tire was invented, they were probably some sort of a wicker woven basket kind of a thing. But yeah, so basically they recycle tires and turn them into these. I think they are way better than the plastic pail or the metal pail because they kind of collapse and scrunch, and so you can actually grab across both handles with one hand. And if they bang against your legs, they don't hurt. And, they're really tough. And I actually put one of those in my suitcase and brought one home one time.
No way.
So I have a goofa. I should have two, but somehow my second one that I purchased ended up being collectively into the whole dig site. And that was a whole adventure because I gave a 20 dinar bill to, at that time, our DOA rep, and asked him if he'd buy two goofas for me, and I never got change.
Of course.
So those two goofas that I only was able to bring one home cost me about $25.
Yeah.
So
Special price, my friend.
yep.
Special.
So
Good deal. Very good deal.
the way that they make ladders are extremely rickety because basically these things don't go in with pegs. They're nailed.
Yeah.
They're really scary. Here, this object right here that kind of looks like a hoe. It's called a turia, and that's the Middle Eastern version of a hoe.
Yeah, the turia.
It's good for scraping. This pick actually looks like a standard pick that we would see. So I'm not sure if we purchased any picks and brought them there, or there may have been a modern enough hardware store that we bought one.
They're local. And we use a pick just to sort of loosen up the surface a little bit. We don't pick hard. We just let it fall on let gravity let it fall because we don't want to break any pottery. So we just scratch basically the surface to break it up. And then we use our that turia. We've got a cool way of taking those goofas. If you put those between your legs bend them over toward the ground, you can take that turia and pull it toward you and put the dirt right in that goofa between your legs and let it fall over, and you got a full goofa. Neat way of filling the goofa and getting the dirt out of the square in a hurry. And then we have to sift it, of course, have some small fines. But and of course, the dustpan that the fellow's holding there in his hand, that's one of the.
So I may not be able to zoom in enough. Oh, that works. So the primary tools for excavating are going to be your trowel and your patiche.
Right. That's just a little mini pick.
Yep. And then we've got, there's a brush right there. And another reason that I really like the goofas is because the goofas, we know they are only for collecting debris. They're only for dirt and stuff that we're, getting out of the way, which means that the pails that we use are only for the pottery that we're finding and for, things that are coming out of the ground that we're going to tag in a bag. Whereas like at the site here in New Mexico that we're currently excavating at, we use plastic pails for everything, for dirt removal, and so it makes it actually a little bit dangerous, because if you're not really paying attention and there's a pail for pottery and there's a pail for dirt and you're in a hurry and you just spin around, you can sometimes accidentally dump dirt right into, where you've got material that you just pulled out of the ground that you don't want contaminated again. And it's really bad if you have, the pottery you can brush off, but if it's some sort of a sample of grains, like, this is a Native American site we're working on, and we've got chunks of corn cobs with the corn still on it. So some, amazing stuff. So if you accidentally recontaminate that stuff, it's just bad. So I don't know. GUFAs are a great thing. I was trying to figure out how to actually manufacture those things here, but
Yeah.
I think the problem is
I was just thinking it was a little bit like, I'm a painter. Sometimes I would have a cup of coffee or tea with me on my painting desk. And sometimes I take my brushes and put it, instead of my water, I put it in my tea. So you don't want to mix your GUFAs.
That's bad. That's especially bad if you're oil painting.
Well, exactly. Thankfully it's water, but
Yeah.
still don't want to contaminate my tea or my coffee.
Yeah, I think we
don't want to mix the dirt back in the bucket with your. So that is a really good point, and they don't have those on the Israeli side. So in Israel, when we excavated Shiloh, we had to use buckets for everything, and so
Wow.
you're right, that did become a problem.
Yeah.
So this
Well,
is a
at
bit
least,
of an anomaly for the on the Jordanian side.
yeah, okay, well, maybe we need to talk to the, Department of Commerce and say, you guys could make a lot of money if you figure out how to export these things to other countries, because
That's right.
they really are great. I mean, these things bang up against your legs and they're uncomfortable. And we've just been able to utilize a photograph to, explain archaeology and the techniques a little bit.
Dan?
Yeah.
There's another important tool right there I noticed as well. It's called the Tilly hat.
Oh,
That's a Canadian hat, and I don't know if that's Lane Rittmeyer or not.
no, I
Got
forget.
a blue shirt, and that
Yeah.
blue shirt's from Shiloh, I think. It's the same color as mine. But
Yeah.
I know
So
Lane wore one.
Yeah, David, you and I both wear those, and there was a year, I think it was the year that we were staying in Madaba. I lost it. Usually I have it clipped onto my vest if I'm wearing a ball cap, and I wear the Tilly hat when the sun really comes out and gets too obnoxious. And it just came unclipped from my vest, and I was very, 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 very sad. And about 4 or 5 days later, somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, is this your hat?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we thought it belonged to Dr. Graves because we looked inside of it and it says DRG. Well, DRG are my initials, but that's also Dr. G, and everybody knew David wore."
I remember that. Yeah, they're a good hat, and a lot of people wear them, but I noticed the Tilly there, and so you got to have a broad brim hat. They're one of the best.
Yeah.
They have ventilation up above the top, so they don't get too hot inside, and but it gets a little warm hiking up those hills and down those hills with all that camera equipment. I can remember you lugging a lot of equipment around.
Yeah. So besides the meter stick and the north arrow, the tool of the trade is the camera right here. And when I'm on the site, I don't only do photography. I also shoot a lot of video. This is what we call pottery locus assemblage. So what this means is that each one of these pieces of pottery were found in a single locus it was decided by the square supervisor that we are going to assign a specific designation to this locus, that these individual pieces of pottery have an association. Now a locus can be spread over a reasonably large area, or it could be very contained. But for some reason, all of this was assigned to being, a specific location that had some sort of a change in the properties of the matrix. And these could have been
as a supervisor, a square super, we assign a number to a locus, and that becomes a distinct area that we want to use to identify locus 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever our numbers are. They just progress up, and then if there's a change, we run into a wall or some rock, or a wall splits the room in half, then one side becomes one locus number, and then the other side of the wall becomes another locus number, and then the pottery that we get from either side of the wall, we know where it's come from, and we kind of identify everything on one side. It can be different from the other side, and it can tell us if there's maybe a different room. Maybe we find a lot of cooking stuff on one side. That would be more of a kitchen area. On the other side, we might find some blades or something like that. And so that would tell us that maybe it's an area for preparing the foods, for cutting. So that's why the locus is important, and why we want these types of photographs. We can go back and look at them and say, oh, look at all those cooking jars there. There's some rims, and they look like they're bowls or cooking pots. So that's the value to these types of photographs.
So this winds up, I don't know, David, if this is something that winds up in publications.
Not normally. Normally it would be a single piece or an assemblage of the same pot that we'd use for publication. But this is just a good, like you say, it's good for locus, for telling us what is in our different areas. We can go back and look at our sheet of paper and say locus 3, oh, that's where that's from. Another photograph from another day from locus 3 might tell us more information, and we might find another piece of this. This is valuable at Tel el-Hammam because we had an airburst come through and spray pottery across a number of different squares. And come to find out, some of this pottery was the ability to glue it together. So we were able to tell it came from the same pot. So these kinds of photographs would be helpful in piecing the puzzle together. Yeah, there's another good one there.
Yeah, what's fun about these assemblages is they show the kinds of diagnostic pottery pieces that we collect. So the 3 primary types that are useful for determining what kind of vessel it was and what the time period of the vessel was is if it's a rim. Mm-hmm. So the rim of a jar or a bowl or something like that, or if it's a base, or if it's some type of handle.
And that one's a handle with a rim.
With a rim, yeah. And I was originally told, when you do a pottery assemblage photograph, just put the pieces in and kind of, make them look nice. Well, over the years that I started doing these, I actually started getting a little bit more, we'll say, scientific about it.
Yeah.
Because that one's pretty random, and this is the rim, so I'm not showing what up really is. This one is just a body sherd, but we kept it because those holes are very interesting. And
it's a strainer, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in this one, eventually my technique was I started, okay, let's put all the rims that, it's going up, rim. And then if it's just a body sherd, typically those weren't something that we would collect. However, and this one's got a little bit of a base right there. But these two don't have a rim or a base or a handle, but because of the painting that they did, that's why these ones were kept. And so what I would start doing is I would try to orient the sherds to the wheel marks that you would see if you flip it over and look at the inside. You can see, as the pot was spinning while they were forming it, because they were more likely to smooth the outside than the inside. And so I would look, because the orientation of this one, if I decided to make these lines, they painted it in a direction that happens to go along with the orientation of the wheeling. But sometimes you see these painted marks that are going off in all sorts of other directions, and your brain just decides, oh, I like it oriented like this, but that's not actually how it was actually painted on the vessel. So if you try to orient based on those wheeling striations, that's...
Yeah, generally we go through all of our pottery, and then we keep particular ones, we call them publishables for publication. We may have, we've gone through, I think, I don't know how many, 30, 50,000 pieces of pottery over the various years. And we only keep a few samples of them for publication. And that's just a good representation of a vessel. And we have a lot of the same vessels, so we don't keep them all. We only want to certainly publish a good sampling.
Yeah.
Hey, Daniel,
So-
can you go back to that piece where you showed the rim and also the base?
Yep.
Okay, here you go. I'm just trying to help people out here.
Oh, great.
Okay, here we have the handle, but it's attached to the rim.
Right.
And you can see where the rim is actually going outward, so it's called everted. If it's going in, it'd be called inverted, but it's out. So everted. Here's your handle. And what he's got this, it's tilted facing to you, and it's this base right here. That's what you're seeing on the photo. So you got a rim, you got the handle, and then you got another piece. It's like 3/4 of the base. So it's probably what they call a disc base,
So that looks like a ring base.
a ring base. Okay, disc ring
Yeah.
base. Yes, you're
And
right.
and this one is now that I'm really looking at the photograph, it looks like it's a ring base, but it's not. It's actually, here's a rim, and this is a decoration along the shoulder where it meets. So this vessel would have gone like this and then kind of up a little bit. So this was actually the shoulder of whatever this vessel is rounding out. So
And for
what I
folks to know, when we take and have a piece of pottery with a rim on it, we do what we call sometimes stancing it. And that is we sit it up, we take our trowel, and you lay the trowel flat. Maybe, George, you can demonstrate this, something flat.
I got
and
my
then you
cell
just-
phone flat.
Yeah, something flat,
Sure.
and then you just take the
Okay,
rim
this is
and you can stance it to how it would sit, because you may only have a piece of it.
here's some kind of that's not a good indication of it, but
Well,
I don't
you
have
put
any
it on the-
fragments. Okay, wait a second. Here. Here's a rim, a handle.
Okay, well,
And
you
you can
need to stance it. You need to put the paper on the top,
Like here,
how the rim would be.
how the rim would be. Well, the rim would be probably about this high. This is the handle.
Okay, well, you do this with the rims. I wish I had a
Okay.
piece here to demonstrate. Sorry, guys. But here's a cup of the rim. And
Okay.
you take your trowel and you'd sit it on the trowel, and then you would move it until it's flush, till it's closed. Can you see that?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's how we would stance it. And that way we'd tell, oh, it's flat like this, because
Uh-huh.
sometimes you don't know how the pottery's
Yeah.
sitting.
So if this was actually fragmented, this one, I don't know if you can you see inside? It's actually fragmented. It's been
Yeah.
assembled.
yeah.
But let's say if it's several pieces and I went like this, I can tell, I could level it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. You level it and you see which way it stances, it sits.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can tell that's how it would sit. And then you'd get a little idea of the curve, and that in your mind, you can get an idea of, is it a cooking pot? Is it a bowl? Is it inverted or everted? So it's a way of helping, but we just use, the cheat is just use your trowel and hit out in the field, and sometimes it helps you identify it, that's all. And then it would go to the reading table in the evening after it's washed. And then the professionals that know their pottery really well from the site would do the pottery reading and call it. So
Yeah, and there is a progression of photographs that you take during the season of excavation. So we would start with something that shows the ground before we excavate it. Then then once we start finding things, we take these kind of photographs, pretend that maybe there was, pottery that was found in this photograph that was collected and put into a bag that eventually was these photographs. And then once we get all those locus photographs, the assemblages photographed, then we start doing some more destroying. because what we need to do for publication, and I'll show you, and this is the official first volume for the Tal el-Hammam project. We would actually cut these pieces of pottery as if, you know, you had your mug, David, and you want to be able to pretend that you're attempting to slice that mug exactly down the center.
Right.
So that on this photograph, based on the stancing, and this is you know, one of my other official jobs was somewhere along the line, I turned out to be one of the best cutters. I also had a wet saw, so it was kind of by default. So after I take these photographs, then I go through and I have to cut on a tile saw each one of these, trying to preserve the maximum amount of surface. So on this one here, but I also want to try to cut it so that I'm oriented not to, you know, this direction would probably preserve the maximum amount. But the thing is that based on the radius of this curvature, I have to estimate where the center actually was. So if I was going to cut this base, and these are the easiest ones to cut because you can put the base actually flat on your tile saw and just run it through. But this kind of direction, because this is going to be the peak that has the highest point of this, so I would probably run my cut, you know, sort of about this direction here, taking that peak and wanting to go as if it's going straight through. And so that flush cut gives us, you know, representation of what the side of that vessel would look like if we cut that coffee mug just exactly straight in half. So that eventually the drawing, if you have a copy of one of the, like the Omron plates.
I did that for my for the Roman area.
Okay.
I have a picture, I think, of one.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, and when you look at those, the darkened in portion of that representation of that vessel cut, that represents the portion that I actually cut and is the only portion that we actually completely found. And then the rest of the drawing that's clear and is outlined, that just represents what we know that vessel looks like. And so overall, this is probably, you know, a good indication of what our vessel looks like. But in our publication, we just represented the actual, you know, these are all rims. I do know that the Israelis are now using a 3D scanning technique.
Yeah.
To end up getting, you know, these kinds of images.
Advanced a lot in the last few years.
Yeah.
Maybe Daniel, you could talk a little bit about the taking the final square shot and the contraption that Mike came up with. Taking
Okay.
our aerial shots.
Okay. You know, so Mike Ludini, he owned a construction company, and so his mind thinks very mechanically, and, you know, very much like an engineer. So
Yeah.
prior to the invention of the drone, you want to be able to get the most top down with no distortion. You know, there's serious perspective distortion. We got serious vanishing points because I'm on the ground taking this photograph. And so we want to try to get a representation in a photograph that is similar to the grid that the square supervisors are actually drawing, because theirs is, you know, imaginary straight down. But what Mike came up with was a 30-foot tall extendable pole system with a remote camera head on it. And it was this very ingenious system, but it's such a pain to lug around and stabilize it. And you know, but he did his research and he found, I think it's a Canadian company that makes the remote head. And then you have to get some sort of other transmitter system, because this was before Bluetooth. And so this transmitter plugged into the video output of the camera that then transmitted that to through Wi-Fi to create a network so that you could look at it on an iPad.
Yeah.
And
I can remember standing on a ladder trying to stabilize it and Mike and make sure that things didn't blow over. And but it did get some good aerial photos before, as you say, before. See, we weren't able to use a drone in the Jordan Valley because of the military security for many, many years. And then what happened was National Geographic came in and they wanted to do some photographs. And lo and behold, they got permission. Funny how that works.
Yep. You just find the right politician, the right minister, the right cousin of somebody, and the right amount.
They were able to take drone footages of the site. And, we got some really nice pictures for that. Well, Dan, I think that's been is there anything else you wanted to mention there, or? I covers it.
I could talk all night. I got, we got plenty of stories, David.
Oh yeah, we do.
But I'll just real quick, one other reason to always have a camera with you is you get to take photographs like that, so touring around other sites.
Is that Kais?
It is.
Okay.
It absolutely is. And I think
black and white site. A lot of basalt there in the black, and then the beautiful limestone. And I went there one day, and it was pouring rain. All we could do was sit in the restaurant next to the fire and have chai, and I couldn't see a thing, so we had to go back. But
that's horrible. So I believe, David, I believe this is the edge of the escarpment that starts going down into the Jordan Valley.
Yes, yeah.
So this is Israel. Yeah, this is Israel across here. And if I had turned to the right just a little bit, you can actually see the Sea of Galilee down off of this edge. Yeah. So.
And this is where the story in the Bible comes of the pigs that were the casting out of the demons, and went into the pigs, and they went up over the cliff and down into they think that's the spot, the location the story comes from. But a good place to visit, and some beautiful landscape. That's a nice clear shot.
Well, yeah, this was fun, David. I'd enjoy doing this again at some point, and we'll try to come up with some other things, to talk about photographically. I mean, we didn't even touch on, any video stuff.
A video one.
Yeah, so we can do a whole thing on video. And
so it's just an introduction for our viewers to give them an idea of how it's done and when it's done. We tried not to be too technical, but every photo is important, and we need to preserve it for posterity. So that's the value, really, of and importance of photography. So photographers are wandering around the site all day, and then we call them over. We found something, and they take an important photograph, and then you take a bunch of casual photographs of us just sitting around eating our lunch or whatever. How many photographs do you think you would take in one season?
If I'm there the entire time, start to finish, which puts me there anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, in a long season, I could easily reach 6,000 or more.
Right.
And, again, the cameras just make it very easy to just keep clicking and clicking and clicking. And so,
so about 1,000 a week.
If I'm not doing anything official and I'm just wandering around, I take a lot of photos that are not official. Obviously, the number of official photos are going to be very, very limited. So that could only be a couple hundred in a season, but just.
And those aren't done on location. They're done back at usually our hotel in a separate room with special lighting and the setup. I'll show a photograph of that with Mike and you, and how that's done. But that's an isolated area where only one item is done at a time there. But they all have to be photographed, so it takes Mike and you quite a long time after the day or on the weekends to get all the extra stuff photographed.
Now,
But
David, real quick, I know we're out of time, but the photographer on a dig, I'm going to assume you consider it a very important position.
oh yeah, probably the most important.
But is that something that you think that a student interested in archaeology could actually decide, okay, I want to be an archaeologist, but my specialty, some people are special, their specialty is pottery, some it's architecture, some it's bones, some it's
Yeah,
botany. Do you feel that there really is room for, if you really want to be the photographer on a site, that you don't necessarily have to have an archaeology degree to do that. You just got to be good at taking photos, but
right.
that it
But
it's
special kind of
something that,
photos too, not just, pictures of your family, or good at taking pictures of trees or
yeah,
birds. You have to be able to do, think a little differently. But yeah, I think that's a photographer that has the ability with the camera and the equipment can easily be able to port that over into to archaeology, and that would be a valuable career and valuable for a dig. And
yeah.
as we saw on our site, we needed two of you because the site was so big too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about, how big it was, and, climbing up into the dolmen fields, which were,
Yeah,
how much hiking you do. So you got to be in
yeah,
very, very good physical condition.
yeah. We had the upper tell, lower tell. They're a few thousand feet difference in some places, and as you say, the dolmen fields are up on the hillsides. You
Yeah.
got to do a lot of walking, a lot of carrying of so you got to be in good shape. But yeah, that would be a career in and of itself. So
Yeah. Well, that's good. Career is the word that I like to hear, because that means that, a young individual that wants to get into archaeology could use that as a career, as opposed to, um, not, because a lot of the people who excavate are volunteers, and so,
yeah,
having a career where it really is your job and your career, that you can make a living, and that.
I really enjoyed it, Dan, going down memory lane. Now, George, did you have any questions, or did you want to?
Maybe I'd like to do one thing. I might have to piece it in somehow. If we could go back to that picture, we had the blue shirts in it, and it's kind of like just click on that.
Okay,
Now this, if you would, for the listening audience, we're just going to go over some terminologies. Now you get you have it roped off because of the surveying, and it's 6 by 6 meters square.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Now, could you point to what we call a bulk? You mentioned a bulk. What in this
so
picture?
this
Well,
whole thing that looks like a wall.
Okay.
and it's
That's the bulk.
usually it's a meter that we don't excavate. We leave it, so we get a straight wall on it. So we usually go 5 meters by 5 meters. So the north and the east side is left unexcavated. However, in my Roman area, we did more what was called architectural archaeology, where we would go on the basis of the Roman walls themselves. We put the squares in, but a lot of times we take the bulk, that 1 meter by 1 meter area, the border, 1 meter by 1 meter on the north and east side, we take it out. And that's a little probe. So we have a little square within a square. We still keep the probe square. That's probably going out 2 meters by 2 meters, or 3 meters by 3 meters maybe. And yeah, I have to have enough room to work. You see Dr. Collins is down there with his hat, and the local worker working with a Turia. And yeah, they're trying to go down quick and dirty fast, and document things. Dr. Collins likes to get the dirt out and see what he's got. So
So what period was this? Is it Middle Bronze Age, Iron Age?
this would have been when they first started on the top. On the very top, there was a Roman structure, a tower. This is up on the Acropolis. My guess is they're probably working into the Iron Age there, and just getting into the Middle Bronze. And that's what Dr. Collins was trying to investigate and interested in.
Okay. Now, as we're looking at, let's say, straight at the wall or the bulk, what would be the strata? that's it. You could zoom in and say, what's strata if we were looking at it?
Well, it would all be, you can see a bit of a line going through it, a wavy piece of darker dirt.
Yes.
That
This
would be
stuff-
one strata
Yep.
right above Dr. Collins's head. Right
Yeah.
there. Yeah, right there. And then you see some rock up above that. So there's another area that could be a wall. It could be a floor. You'd have to excavate the squares beside it in order to tell what that was. But this helps us to read it and see all the different layers of the cake.
Right. So that layer right above Dr. Collins's hat,
Yeah,
and it's dark. Was that like a destruction layer?
it could
I'm just
be.
throwing stuff out.
It could be.
Okay.
Below that
And-
is that area that we saw a photograph earlier of the brick
Right.
wall, the mud brick wall. So we see the mud brick. Mud brick probably is Middle Bronze, and those stones above are probably Iron Age wall, is my
Mhm.
guess, because the Iron Age most of the time they'd use the stone. Middle Bronze stuff they'd use mud brick. It's sun dried and rather than fired.
So,
So-
from the top level, you guys are down probably, if Steve is 6 foot, you're down like at least 12 feet
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
at least. Then,
Yeah. Because
okay, when we're looking at the strata, how thick can a strata level get?
Oh, it depends. I mean, some places we had 2 or 3 meters of soot and char of
Yeah.
destruction layer.
yeah.
It depends on how much falls in on top, I guess. And so you never know quite. And it's not always just even. It's not flat. It takes the contour of the tell itself. So you have things going up and down. And you generally have, flat floors. And you dig down until you find the floor. And that tells you where one period ends and another one starts. We had a child burial under the floor of a room, not far
Don't you have a
from this
picture of
spot.
that, at least fragments of the child burial?
Yeah, I can provide a photograph of that. Yeah.
Let's see what else. I'm just trying to sum it up for our listening audience.
Sure.
Okay, the rubber containers, those were called the gufas,
Yep.
Goopa.
gufa. And then let's say you had the pick. You got the guy's pick right there. He's got it in his hand.
No,
Mhm.
that's
Right.
no, that's a hoe. That's a turia.
That's the Taria. Okay, that's
Yeah.
the Taria.
That's the hoe. And there's the pick. The guy in the blue shirt's got the pick. Yeah.
Okay, the Taria, the pick.
And there's
And
another
then you
turia.
had the other items. You said the mainstay.
They're going to
the
be
turia.
the trowel.
Yeah. And we use the Marshalltown trowel, which is a brand name that is the best for archaeology. Marshalltown. It's got the red handle, black end on it. And we always put our initials on the end of it because you get them all confused. And there's different sizes. My wife used a smaller one and I used a little larger one, and she just found it easier to work with. And then you
Yep.
have the pick over there, a little mini pick under the bucket. Yeah, right there.
Okay.
That's called a patiche. And it's
Patiche,
got a
yes.
flat edge on it.
And these things have gotten really
A lot of
expensive.
times geologists would use in geology.
All right, so it gives our listening audience kind of like a quick rundown about, and this would be, if you were a square supervisor, this is your square, and you're
Yep.
responsible for that. And all
And you
these
go.
guys piling in.
Yeah.
Yep. You got to keep a real careful eye on them.
Yeah. No digging holes.
No digging holes. Okay.
The one rule. You heard me tell you that, didn't you, George?
Oh, yeah.
You
I
were
think I
working
remember
my
that
square,
statement,
George,
yeah.
the first season
No digging
or
holes.
second season.
Right.
Yeah, no digging holes.
I don't think we are down that deep. Well, maybe we were.
No, we
Not
weren't
maybe.
down that deep. No, we weren't. Well, it's really great to have you, Dan, and explaining a little bit of the photography.
All right, but I really appreciate you two gentlemen being on our program, Daniel, and sharing your experience at Tel el-Hammam. This has been quite interesting to understand not just the photographs, but also the complications that go into an excavation.
Yeah.
It's not all Indiana Jones, is it? I mean, that's a lot of back-breaking work. Look at digging this down using these two Guptas or whatever. You got more there, but pail by
Yep.
pail or whatever.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's
I volunteer a backhoe.
what's
Yeah.
the many hands makes light work.
Yeah.
So,
We did bring in
Right.
some heavy equipment to move some of the debris after we pull it out of there, and it's all been sifted and checked for any pottery and what have you. We would bring a
Mhm.
front end loader to remove some of the debris. We just have so much of it up on top of the tell, but we don't use heavy equipment to do any of our archaeology. All done by hand. Well,
All
great,
right.
George.
Well,
Thanks very much again, as always.
well,
Good
thank
to
you
meet
guys.
you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. And everybody, of course, we reached our 100. We're about 118,000 subscribers. Really appreciate everybody participating in Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. Daniel, David, and the listening audience, you have a good night because it's nighttime here in Albuquerque. So whenever, morning, evening, when you're watching the program, just have a great day. Thank you for your time.